Let's go to patterns today. I've kind of shifted, if you have paid very close attention to the order of my elements, I have mixed them up. So if you haven't, that's good. That was really my intent, and I've just shown my hand. But I wanted to do patterns because I thought it was a lovely segue from rhythm. And we talked last week about that, the overlap that happens sometimes with pattern and with rhythm, or in the case we were talking rhythm and how pattern sometimes comes in. I want to talk for a minute about just the general idea of pattern, because it's been a little while since we talked about it, and then I want to go to the gospel application, and then we're going to go to a real life application, sort of. So tell me about patterns. What are patterns in life, and why do they have value in our lives? What patterns do you see, and why are they of value? Yes, Sister Wayne. Okay, and this gets to a really important point, and that is one of the values of patterns is consistency and predictability, right? You know it's going to happen. And there is something these days, as chaos seems to be reigning in many aspects of my life and in many aspects, I think, of all of our lives, there's something very comforting about consistency and predictability. So that's one of the values of patterns. What else do you see? Where do you see patterns in our lives, and what's the value of patterns?
I love Jason's idea of communication as predictability, along with patterns, along with the idea that we discussed the first week in class as communications as a way to live vicariously, as a way to experience something that you haven't actually been through, and that idea that pattern can connect one person and one thought and one experience to the other, because even if they are different, they follow that same, they follow the same structure, and the way that as like pattern as predictability and communication as a means of trying to create control in your life, whether it be like allowing someone to hear what you need or else need. I think pattern finds a way of control in the midst of chaos in a very similar way that balance does, and we talked about balance.
Okay, so let's work on this idea of pattern in chaos, because that's another value of patterns, that it eliminates the noise and it gives you something. It takes you see a structure within the noise. Yeah, Louis.
I like those paintings or those murals and things like that, where the guy looks like he's doing chaos, but he's actually making a face in the wall.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Sometimes you just start splattering things against the wall, or like pattern, and then out of nowhere, all painting of Jesus or whatever comes out of nowhere, and you're like, what? That is absolutely.
I love that pattern out of chaos. Sometimes another example of that for me, any of you do New York Times Connections?
Wait, what is that? Yes.
The New York Times Connections. So if for those of you who don't know, it's 16 words that all appear. Sometimes it's multiple, but usually it's single words. And you have to find 4 sets of groups that have some kind of connection. And that moment that I first look at it, and it seems there's nothing in it. I don't see anything. And to watch it, to allow my brain to put the pattern together, to connect those pieces, and all of a sudden it just sort of dawns, just like you're saying, the splattering, and then it's like, oh wait, I see it. Or when you do that thing where you kind of look past it and you try to see that 3D image when it looks like nothing and then something appears, it gets rid of all that extra, and all of a sudden you're able to see something clearly because there's that pattern there. I love that moment, that aha moment when that pattern becomes clear. Yeah, Joshua.
I think in another example of finding patterns in chaos is like in the course of our lives, we try and understand what's happening to us, and we turn to stories of other people's lives and literary tropes and heroes and good versus evil and that sort of thing to find meaning in our own lives.
I love that. So we look for patterns that we've seen other places, try to apply to make sense of our chaos, which I love. How does that have any kind of gospel tie in there?
I think it really connects to what Nick said last week when we were talking about rhythm and the rhythm of wickedness versus happiness or wickedness versus good. Was that idea that we kind of like reached this random like culmination of chaos, and we were all like, "That's wickedness, there it is." And then as it died out, and we had those more recognizable beats, that was going throughout it, the harmonizing, the humming that continued. It became more peaceful, more recognizable. It felt good in a way that was like, oh well, good. And I think those patterns are both a combination of nature versus nurture, and like a way that we roll in chaos and we seek for that metronomic beat.
Yeah, Oakley.
In regards to like theater and dance, because that's what I always come from, is when there is a choreography where they have a pattern in it, it's to direct the eye or to identify something, latch onto that. But it's like a fun motif almost, where if you see it, it just helps deliver more and more. It also kind of goes with clarifying or eliminating chaos, just directing the focus. Oh yeah, that's what we're focusing on.
I love that, directing focus. So helping us again see what we're supposed to see.
And a lot of the scriptures kind of give us the blueprint of like, here's the pattern. Look for this pattern in your own life. With the spiritual, where God is intervening in your life.
I love microcosm and macrocosm. I love the fact that God gives us in our lives these very, for instance, the pattern of a heartbeat. It's very clear. Now it may speed up, it may slow down, we may have varying rhythms in it, but we've got that sustains our very life. That at our most fundamental level, that is inherent into an inherent part of us being alive, is that. And then you take it and extrapolate it out to the greater, like you're talking about, the patterns we see on a much more cosmic level. Talk to me, those of you who are more sciencey oriented, about this idea of patterns as you use patterns to verify or find truth. Anybody have experience with that? Those of you, yeah.
One idea comes to mind, and it's a book my grandpa gave me years ago that I still haven't. It's called A Beautiful Question, and it's written by a scientist who has observed symmetry. I think pattern, one aspect of that is symmetry. The left side of people's faces usually looks like the right side of one side of the flower probably is going to match the other side of the flower, and then right down all the way to the level as well. And so his theory, I think he's kind of like a believing scientist, and he doesn't like make it, he doesn't put it out there explicitly in the book, but he says this is the creation of some master. I think he's a pattern for things really kind of amazing.
Yeah, I love that idea that you can look at a creation and determine things about the creator. That the patterns that are created in the creation give you information about who created it. That is a beautiful idea. Any other thoughts on how patterns help verify or find truth? Gets rid of the noise. Yeah, great.
Something that Jason has a better grasp on than I do, but I had a math brain for a minute, and now I don't. But mathematical proofs are a way to reassert that something is true. You already know the equation. You already know it's true. I remember being in like pre-calc, and I just like hated doing proofs because I was like, know this, and my friends in calc taught me this shortcut, and like I know that it will always be this, but you're telling me I have to write out every simple step to show why this is true. And I find a lot of strength in that, and I used that a lot as well in my social science life. Of the way that we tested things in social science was not to see if our hypothesis was true, but it was to see if the null hypothesis, the thing that we already thought was normal and happening, was not true. And it really makes me think of the call in Moroni 10:3-5, where he says, "I would ask if these things are not true." He doesn't say like, "Hey, like go ask if these things are true." He's like, "Listen, we've given you everything. I'm telling you it's true. You have been operating on the null hypothesis that it is true. Hopefully. So go ask to be proven wrong. You won't be. We know that this is true." And the way that helps me, I never had a wow, this is it moment. And so having that moment where I was like, oh, it's a null hypothesis. This is science. This is a science experiment. And this is saying, is this true? Is this not true? And the book is the proof. And the whole process of the patterns that we see, the rhythm that I see, the contrast, the unity, every part of the stories of the Book of Mormon is the substance of the experiment of the null hypothesis.
Cool. And great segue now. So to the Book of Mormon, to the idea of patterns in the Book of Mormon. Can you think of any off the top of your head that are patterns in the Book of Mormon that you would identify as such? Yeah, Louis.
Nephites fall because they're wicked, and so it's like
that pattern.
Stop listening to the prophet, dies, comes back.
The pride cycle.
The pride cycle. So you've got
We talked a lot about that.
Yeah, you got a couple of great ones right there. So we've got the pride cycle up there, and we've got it very clearly set that you've got they're righteous, they're making great choices. Then what happens in there? What starts to happen?
They start to get comfortable because by that time they're typically wealthy.
Yes, because they've prospered, because they're righteous, and then they're prosperous, and pride comes in, and then they become wicked, and then the Lamanites come in, and then we they're humbled because they're destroyed, and then we get the cycle around and around again. So we've got that pattern. We could put it the pride pattern instead of the pride cycle if we wanted. Look at Doctrine of Christ. Look that up and see what you see in 2 Nephi. See if you see any pattern in that more specifically. Yeah. So take a look at that for just a minute and see what you see as far as a pattern. Okay, there's a through line there. Yeah. So there is the pattern continues. It almost becomes a circular sort of pattern. Anything else? Yeah, Fleur. Yeah, I love that we do, because there is that idea that we keep going through the pattern, right? We don't just have faith and we're done. Great, we've got faith, now check that one and we'll go on to the next one. It's a continuing process, and I love that idea of it being circular, because that circular, if it can lead us up, is also progressive. Any other thoughts on the pattern of the doctrine of Christ? Yeah, it's not just staying in the circle. There's progression within the circle. So look at Alma, and let's look at the pattern of conversion. See what you see in Alma. 5, 14, and 15. Anything?
I like the idea of pattern as in a sewing pattern, as in a blueprint, as in how can I make my thing match the pattern? And that's kind of what this is. Have you received the image of God in our countenance? I match the countenance of God.
I love that. I love people who have the ability to create patterns. I was always fascinated when costume designers or costumers, both of them, could take a picture of something and create a pattern to make it. It was just remarkable to me that from a 2D image, they could create something where those pieces would all come together to create a 3D version of it. And this is, in this case, we're being given that pattern, that idea that we don't have to come up with it ourselves. I love that we don't just have to look at Christ and say, okay, we've got to be like him. But we have these pieces, and we have these parts of a pattern defined for us. So we say, if you want to be more like Christ, well, we start with faith here, and we put on repentance, and we put those pieces together. But it helps create that pattern for us that we're not trying to figure out just, that's you, this is me, and I don't know how to get there, which is how I felt with costumes. I don't know how to get between the two, but we're given that pattern to make. Any other thoughts on that? Or on anything with that scripture? All right, let's look at one more. Let's look at 3 Nephi 9, 5 through 11. You're going to have to look for this pattern. See what you find in there. Okay, see anything?
Fascinating that while he talks about for destruction behind all of it, and while that is likely very important to the people who did survive to know, oh, we survived because we are not that, so maybe we should not be that. I find it really impactful that in every method of destruction, that what was created was a new stuff. There's this saying, without fire, a phoenix would just be a bird standing up. And I think that there is a lot of, there's a pattern in that destruction, while doing away with the old, creates a fresh start, creates new earth, or water, or hills and valleys that weren't there before. Fire is regularly used in order to create a fresh start for a different ecosystem. That in all of the different methods of destruction, the pattern that I noticed was the ability for a fresh start.
Cool. I hadn't seen that one. And we know it goes to 4 Nephi, where you have this wonderful community that grows out of this, that again, out of the destruction rises the beauty for ashes. What about, do you see any repeated phrases in there that will give you another pattern? Because our pattern was the pattern of destruction. Do you see what causes that, what Natalie was referring to? that gives us kind of a warning? Because sometimes patterns warn. Yeah, what do you see, Jason?
Like a lack of righteousness.
Okay.
Not righteous. So I just want to add a little question here. Like verse 13 says, "Oh, all ye that are spared, because ye were more righteous than they." I don't know, something about that rubs me wrong. It's like, how does it say you were spared because you were righteous? You were spared because you were more righteous than the rest. Like, not because you were righteous, but because you were more. Like, I don't know. The sense of comparison bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, Fleur.
It wasn't that all the righteous were taken. But it's like people across the
So when we have an interesting question like that, and I understand your concern with that, is there a pattern you can think of with God that would help make sense of the question that Jason has? Why is, go ahead, say it again. You'll say it better than I will.
Yeah, like the scripture says, like the people that were spared because they were more righteous than other people. Why not just say they were righteous people, right? Like, why is it that they're two people?
Thought about this. So I feel like when we're gone from this earth, we're still learning. We're still going to keep going. That's the only way we can.
Mhm.
So will there bad? Will they always have to learn? Knowing.
Must be opposition in all things.
Because so when we are talking about, I think everybody, there's two sides to every person. You know, it's just what that person chooses to do.
You made me think of something. So it's almost saying like he was to say because you were righteous. That kind of what
Kind of like
that's a really cool point. Not in necessarily putting them down in a way.
because you
More
can
righteous.
choose. That's the reason why he gave us the choice.
That's
And
cool way
to
look at it.
actually choose the righteous way, you know, there's two paths. There's not really a gray. You either choose right or wrong. Weird, but you know, and it's either you chose that to do righteous or
Sister Wangster? Good question.
Isn't that
writing where it says, "Will ye now return to me, repent of your sins, and be I make you." And I think it's kind of a compliment sandwich. It's kind of a little bit like, hey, like, have you guys ever seen The Testaments? The movie about it makes me think of the main character of The Testament. I watched that a lot on my mission because COVID started. And it makes me think a lot of the idea that, like, yeah, he wasn't the best character. He really was not that great, but he gets to survive because he remembered things and did some good things in the end that were. But it's not to say like, okay, you are completely righteous and righteousness is a one and done, but you are more righteous. I think there's a struggle of comparison. I think that happens frequently. I think humans are doomed to comparison, and that kind of perpetrates the pride cycle in a weird way. But I think there's a power of comparison of what you do not want to become, which is that pattern of warning. And I think it's in the pride cycle as well, of the warning of what you do not want to become. And when you forget the warning, and when you forget that is when pride creeps in, and when it takes over. And you see that in 4th Nephi is when people forgot Christ and forgot the experience or had not lived there. It's tough, and they on and pride creeps in.
I think there's also the pattern that we see throughout is God is as merciful as he can be. And we see that pattern over and over. There is justice and mercy, and we see those patterns side by side where God executes his justice and his mercy. And we don't always know exactly which groups get which, but there's the implication here in this last part that they will return to him. And it may be his judgment that the others were not going to have that kind of humility and be in a place in that cycle that they would be willing to continue on out of destruction to committing back to being righteous again. Yeah,
Back to
Oakley.
your original point, I think the words blood of the prophets is
Over and over.
over and over.
Yeah. And maybe, and again, becomes one of those patterns that you look for and you say, why were they destroyed? Because they didn't heed the prophets, because they killed the prophets. You know, that becomes a pattern that becomes really important. And to us in our day, we've got General Conference coming up. Why should that pattern have any relevance to us? We're not killing prophets. What is the relevance to us in our lives? Okay, so we get distracted. We miss that pattern of the value of following prophets. And how do we do that today? How do we avoid the same condemnation that they are under? We are not. We'll make a commitment right now. We will not kill President Nelson.
I think that the pattern that comes in is the atonement. It is the repentance. It is the remembrance. And it is the doctrine of Christ that comes in. That General Conference is not necessarily a pattern right now to remind us not to kill the prophets or to remind us of the existence of following the prophets. But I think it is a pattern of remembrance of there's always a call to repentance, whether it be internal or external. And I think another thing is that it is a reminder that revelation has not ceased. And the pattern of revelation will help you get through.
And even the pattern of every 6 months, even that pattern of every 6 months, even the pattern of the way each of the sessions are constructed, that pattern, what does that pattern look like in our lives? Are we committed to participating in that? Or does it become, well, if I'm available, I'll see it. Where do we move the noise, see the pattern, and go, I'm going to embrace this pattern, and I'm going to be part of it? Yeah.
So, I think Heavenly Father, he works with potential. He doesn't really work with already things that are.
Thank heavens. He couldn't work with any of us if that were the case. Yeah.
So when he says, will you, he's giving you a chance to keep growing. You know? Chance to be more righteous.
And honoring our agency, which I love both of those.
Agency, because if somebody, I guess, choosing something else means okay, you're complete. Can't really work with you until you're ready to grow. It's like a missionary talking to investigators. When investigators talk to them, sometimes they're like, okay, they get to grow, get baptized, and sometimes they're just not.
And that's another great pattern, the offering. Will you do this? How many times does God, will you? You know, I would that you would allow me to gather you as a hen with her chicks. And all these times when he offers something, and will you take it? Will you do these things? Is a really strong pattern as well. Libby.
So I had a random thought going to my head. So I think about, this has made me think about like the pattern that I do when I make puzzles, and something that over the time of like doing puzzles as a kid to now is now I always look for the corner pieces, all the side pieces before I try to go into the middle. So that just makes me think if it's like, reading the scriptures, going to church, certain doctrines is we have to help us make the outside of the puzzle before we can work on creating inside of the puzzle. And then after you finish one puzzle, there's so many more puzzles to work on.
We tend to love those patterns, right? We get comfort in that pattern, that habit, that idea of how we establish a habit. I don't remember what the science is. You're supposed to do it 30, 40 times something, and then it's a habit. And that idea of, what does it look like? We have these habits of how we put a puzzle together, which really makes no difference in our lives. But do we have those same habits with our scripture study, with our prayers, with those simple things that lead us and help us have set the patterns that God says, here's your pattern. If you do these things, you will become like me. Do we establish those patterns in our life? Yeah, okay.
I like to say that I think patterns exist because they work. They wouldn't exist if it didn't.
Work.
And so I love
Tried and true.
I love how you talked about general conference. Like that's a beautiful pattern and it works. But when we implement it into our lives, are we taking the accountability ourselves?
Yeah.
Because we're not going to kill them. But how can we honor them?
Yeah.
And apply what they're teaching us instead of just being like, oh, I'm just showing a picture.
Right. Right. Yeah.
As a social scientist and a practitioner, this makes me think a lot about rites and rituals and the performance of and the performance of a pattern. And there is structure and in performance. And I love performance studies because it is the sociology of theater, and I find it incredibly fascinating to think about the fact that sociology just is that you're always performing, that you are always putting on something that I am performing student or performing teacher or performing gender and age and different things about being performing artist right now. And I think that there's a lot of patterns in which we assign ourselves roles that we aren't realizing necessarily because we've been conditioned into performance, and that's part of the ritual and part of the sacrament meeting ritual is I will play the role of a parishioner who will partake of the sacrament. In that part, I will also play the role of a covenant keeper who is thinking about my relationship with Jesus Christ. In that, I will play the role of like all of these different things, and that all happens in the span of less than 5 minutes, especially in Brooklyn. And there are a lot of things that you can really dive into, and then social science-wise, think of how am I performing this role, and that goes back to predictability, and it goes back to looking at self and all of these things that I find fascinating to talk about forever, but I'm going to stop. But I think that patterns and structure and performance and creating that sociality is all a lesson in control. And as we learn to control our bodies, our minds, ourselves, our temporal experiences as best as we can, with all of the chaos, all the agency of others, all the choices that we have to make, all the infinite paths available, that the way that we go through this control and get on that straight and narrow and get through the cycle of rising will create the best version of ourselves. And that's what we want to concentrate.
Great. Okay. Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, since we're diving so deep into this pattern, something that I experienced in college and thought a lot about is like you get the same pattern, but it depends on when you start listening to it, right? So like, maybe an easy example is like you have this pattern of like a soft beat and like a loud beat, right? So it's like, or if you start in the loud beat, it's like there's a slight difference in the way that you hear it. And I think that like perspective shift, no matter what pattern we're in, is important. So not high school, for college, I had this like epiphany where it's like, because there's a pattern of rest and wake and work, right? You sleep, you rest, and then you wake up and you do whatever. in college, I realized that I was working so I could rest. I found myself at 2 a.m. every day. I need to finish this assignment so I can go to sleep. Right? I need to get this work done so I can go to sleep. But in reality, we are meant to rest so that we can work, right? Sleep so that we have enough energy for the next day to accomplish whatever it is we need to do. So I feel like in college I was like living on the downbeat, right? Not on the upbeat. So I think in like the gospel, it's important to recognize like, we take our time to rest and refuel so that we can serve, rather than serving others so that we can rest easily. Sometimes like, I just do all these good things. I want to go to celestial kingdom. I want to, have a good afterlife, whatever. In reality, like, if we have the character of Christ, we're always going to use our rest time to prepare to continue to serve.
I love that idea. And so interesting that the same sounds, the pattern we perceive differently with that soft, loud, or soft, or vice versa. Bum, bum, bum. It's so interesting. Yeah.
Like sometimes you find patterns in your memory, like or your moments in your life. Like, oh, that connects. Like holy, wow, that's and
so important, right?
I mean, I guess this is the reason why the remembering part, remember,
Yeah.
scriptures always remember, and so like,
That's a big pattern.
Yeah.
So like, all right, this was my kind of remember moment when I was about to go to before I came to the mission, when I went to the mission. So I was in college. I was 18, right? And yeah, I was on the down beat. I was totally out of it, and I was like, I'm not gonna go. I wasn't going to church really, and so my friend, she would be like, Brooklyn, you have to go, because I was the only one from Brooklyn. So they would call me Brooklyn, and she would say, go to church, and then there was one week where there's conference. Like, go to conference, go watch it in your church. I was like, nah. I lived literally across the street from the conference center. And so one day I went and I was just sitting in their common rooms. I was visiting my friend, and a girl just comes in asking people, hey, do you want to go to a conference with me? I have an extra ticket. So then she comes to me and she's like, do you want to go with me to the conference? I just have this extra ticket. Have it. I said, all right, I'll take it. I did. And then the next day I go. And then I fell asleep through most of the conference.
Church sleep is good sleep.
I fell asleep through the whole conference. And then
Sorry.
and so then the prophet at the end, he comes in with Thomas as Muslim, and he's like, I say, okay, you know what? It's good to wake up for the prophet at least. Everybody gets up and they wait. And I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit awake. But before he even started talking, I had this like wave, boom, like the spirit just stopped saying, "Ready to go on your mission. You won't be going now, but you will be going in the future." I was like crying, all all teary-eyed. And I was like, "This is." And so time goes. I get a good job. My bishop's like, "You have to pay for your own mission." I was like, when I get back to New York, you gotta go pay for it. I didn't have a job. It was like $10,000. That's a lot of money, and I'm only like 19. So, not kidding. Like 3 days later, my uncle's like, "Get ready. You're gonna come work for me on movies and TV." Okay. I mean, I prayed about it. I said, God, if you wanted me to go, let me go. Next day, boom, job, paying $45 an hour. I was like, whoa, for a 19-year-old,
That's huge.
That is impressive. Like, that is unheard of.
Yeah.
I go, I spent so much money, and I still ended up saving $10,000 for a mission, which was easy for me. But you think back and you're like, that's like.
And that thinking back, I think, is so important because patterns sometimes only come when we look backwards at them. We don't see, we're in the midst of the mess, we're not seeing that pattern. But that, they say that hindsight's 20/20, but that ability to have that perspective, to see the past, you see patterns that you couldn't see when you were in the middle of them. Yeah.
Like really, really bad.
Yeah. Which you couldn't see all the pieces that led up to until you looked back.
What's the point?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. And
Yeah.
like, I was a young kid. And then I was like, oh, this is
Okay, we are out of time, but I want to say two last things. First of all, look for patterns. I hope that you recognize how important they can be in your life, whether it's looking back and seeing how things have happened in the past so that you can anticipate, again, that predictability idea. Can we look at the past so that we can predict the future? Is there that consistency that provides comfort, knowing that that sun's going to rise, knowing that we can count on patterns, that we can count on that consistency, that it allows you to get rid of the noise and the distractions so that you can see, that it helps you focus. All of these things are the value and the power of patterns. So look for the evidence of patterns in your life this week. I want you to do one other thing. I don't want this class just to be about the philosophies of art. I want us to begin to start to work on how we can create, because it's great to talk about it, but if we aren't creating the art, we're missing a chance to share things in a language that someone else might understand. So what I want you to do is think about what patterns would sound like or look like, just pieces of things that start to make, I was going to do this exercise, but it'll be better. We'll start with it next week, I think. Last week we did the vocal jamming stuff where we made sounds and tried to find rhythm in sounds. We didn't have, not a lot of you were here. So it's called vocal jamming. And we created this sound sculpture and tried to find rhythm in it and saw what happened and how we felt doing it. We're going to do that with patterns. So I want you to think about what patterns you want to bring to create this. Those of you who weren't here before, don't be afraid. Was it scary, those of you who were here? Okay, and that's fine. Because Jason, you really speak a different language than I do. Because you have that science and that math, and you don't even have to participate. You can listen and see what you get out of it. If you want to participate by observing, that works fine. Okay? Those of you who want to participate, because art always requires a spectator, right? Art does not exist without someone to receive. You have to have the giver and the receiver. You can be a receiver. But those of you who want to do that, then let's play with this idea. We're not going to do it the whole time. We're just going to do it briefly. We'll move on to another pattern, to another element. But I did want to give us a chance to try this one more time to see what we could create, because I ideally want you to come out of this class with an idea of what you can create, okay? Again, sound can be any kind of sound, white noise. If you want to bring something that makes sound, you can bring something that makes sound. We are out of time.